friends, have you ever wanted to cosplay a tiefling or a devil or maybe even an imp, but you're not quite sure how to make one of those pesky tails? Like many people, last year I fell deep into the Baldur's Gate 3 hole, so of course I was going to cosplay from it, and I am a sucker for a tiefling and a devil. So of course I had to cosplay Raphael, and that meant I had to make myself a little tail. I've made a tail once before for my Jester cosplay from Critical Role, but it's been a while since I did it, and I had a little bit of help making the last one, so I wasn't quite sure how to go about making the new one. And the way that I went about it ended up being a lot easier than I expected and was super cheap, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. This method is really great because it cost me under £20. Most of it I already had lying around. It's super lightweight, it's poseable, and best of all, it looks pretty good. So if you're looking for a cheap way to make a tiefling or a devil or just a long tail in general for anything, welcome, we're gonna do that here. That's what this video is about. Okay, let's go. Okay, so to start out with, I'm gonna show you what you need. I will write a handy little list on this side of the screen. So first and foremost, most importantly, you're gonna want one of these bad boys. I've got two because I just got a spare, but these are foam insulation tubes that are usually used to like wrap wiring in DIY. You can pretty much get these from any DIY store in the UK. Like I got these from Proper Job. I don't know if Proper Job's something that's just a Somerset thing, but like the range, just basically any hardware store normally has these. The Wicks also do them. These cost like £1.50 each, so they're just really cheap and easy. They're super lightweight, and these are gonna be the main body for our tail. This is what we will be using. Material-wise, you're also gonna want some craft foam. This is kind of optional, but I think it's a really important step in making the tail look good. I basically use the craft foam to make the little ridges on the back of the tail to just give it a little bit of texture, and it also helps giving it a little bit more stability as well. I've just got this random bag I've collected over the years, but you're gonna want some like stuffing, or you can use scrap material. We're gonna use this to stuff the end of the tail tip. For the main colour of the tail, we're going to be using a 4-way stretch spandex. Again, this was like £2 or about £4 for the metre, and I got half a metre of this, and I've already made my Raphael tail and my Raphael hands out of this, so this is what I've got left, and this is going to be perfect for making the Karlach tail we're going to be working on. It's pretty important you go for a 4-way stretch just because it gives you a lot more sort of wiggle room with sewing, but if it's only a 2-way stretch, that also works. Also, the fact it's spandex means it has like a really nice shine to it, so it looks a little bit more fleshy. For shaping the tail, I'm gonna use just a there's hot glue on it. For the main shaping of the tail, we're gonna use just like I don't know what measurement this is, but this is just like a garden wire. Again, I got this from a hardware store. It's used for like gardens, for like securing fences and plants and stuff. And it's pretty like meldable. It's not super hard, but it's hard enough that once you double it up as we're gonna do, it holds its shape really well. And again, this was like £1.50 for the roll. And obviously with that, we're gonna need some wire cutters. Make sure you have wire cutters and don't try and use scissors, because that never ends well. And I'm totally not speaking from personal experience there. Another bit of an oddball thing you're gonna want is bubble wrap. This is gonna be used to wrap around the wire to make it fit in the hole better. Obviously the foam tubes that we're using have like a set size hole in them. And we're just gonna basically use this to wrap around the wire to just make it fit in there better, you know, and just make it a bit more stable. Oh my God, I forgot what this is called. It's not tinfoil, it's the other thing. Cling film. You're also gonna want some tape and some cling film. We're gonna use this to pattern the tail. This is just going to be a really simple, quick process, but this just makes patterning it and getting the sizing exactly a lot easier. Finally, you're going to want some black elastic. This is obviously used to help attach the tail to whatever belt you're going to use. Just elastic, yeah. Other bits you're going to need in general are a hot glue gun, some kind of glue to stick the scaling down onto the back. I use contact adhesive because I find it stays flexible, but you could also use the hot glue gun for this. You're also going to need some thread. I'm going to be using a sewing machine, but you can also hand sew this nice and easy. And then a bit of an optional thing is for the shading. I'm personally going to use an airbrush, but you can also use an eyeshadow palette. But we'll go into that more at the end, and let's get started.
Okay, so to start out with, we're going to take our foam dowel and we're going to cut it to the length we want for our tail. We're then going to start the long, arduous process of carving the foam dowel into a tapering point. This is to get it looking like that natural tiefling shape, but just pre-warned, this takes ages. My biggest piece of advice of this is to just take your time. You want to do it in small little strokes because you don't want to take a big chunk out of the tail because then you're just going to ruin it. Once you've got a lovely big pile of shawarma, we're then going to appreciate our nice smoothing work. Next, we want to go in and give our tail a little bit of shape. So we're going to take that wire we bought earlier, and you could technically buy a thicker wire, but this is just the one I had on hand. What we're going to do is we're going to measure out the length of it, fold it over so it's doubled over, and then cut it down. And then we're going to twist it. We're going to twist it to make it into one solid piece. There is probably an easier way to do this than by hand with like an electric drill or something, but I'm using what I got. So yeah. Twist it into shape. Once the wire's been suitably twisted, we're then going to just bend it into a bit more straight shape so it's easier to get into the tube and cut off any excess bits of wire. Next up, grab your bubble wrap. We're basically using this to pad out the wire so we can put it into the hole nice and easy. And it's not just going to slip and slide out. So you could use like foam padding for this as well. But again, I'm just using stuff I had on hand to make this as quick and cheap as I could. As you can see, I used a little bit of tape just to secure it in place, and then I roll the wrap around the wire. Once it's an appropriate thickness that I know it's going to sit snugly in the hole in the dowel, we're going to wrap it in tape. This is just to secure it all in place as well as make sure that it doesn't unravel before we move on to forcefully shoving this concoction into the hole. That's what she said. And that is the very base of our tail all done. Now to bring it to life. Using some of the earlier mentioned stuffing, I'm actually going to pad out the very end of the tail with it. This is because where we've carved it down, it can be quite flimsy, so this is just going to make it feel a bit sturdier. Next up, we want to pattern the actual fabric for the tail. So if you're a cosplayer, you'll probably know the magic method of cling film and tape. After wrapping my tail in cling film, I'm going to take my painter's tape and cover the whole thing. Again, this is just to make a nice pattern I can easily slice off and use to measure out my fabric. Make sure you're nice and careful cutting this off because you don't want to risk, again, cutting into the tail and undoing all your hard work you've just done. I'm going to put that aside for later and we're going to move on to the scaling details. Taking some nice thin craft foam, I'm going to manually draw out some scaling to go on top of the tail. This is honestly pretty optional, but it really brings the tail to life, it gives it a little bit more structure, and it just makes it look more realistic. Well, as realistic as a tiefling tail can be. I pattern these just by eye and then I cut them out using scissors and a scalpel. As I draw and cut these out, I'm gonna make them gradually get smaller. Again, this just gives it a more natural look as it trails down the tail, from thick at the top to thin at the bottom. Once I've got enough scales to go down the tail as far as I'd like, we're then gonna start the process of gluing. Using contact adhesive, we're gonna start from the very bottom scale and work our way up. This is quite a slow process again because you're going to have to wait for the contact adhesive to dry enough so that it sticks nice, so just be really patient, take your time and do it in little segments. I'm going to glue each scale going up, and then once all of them are on, I'm going to take that contact adhesive and put it on the edge just to make sure everything lays as flush as it can. It's now time to grab our pattern again and draw the shape of it out onto our 4-way stretch fabric. The key for this fabric part is to make it tight enough so that it sits really snug, but it has some movement. This is where using a 4-way stretch really comes in handy. Spandex usually has two kind of textures to it. One has like a really shiny side and the other's more matte, so just make sure that you're consistent with which side you'd want to use. I want to go for the shinier side to make sure it looks like skin. Once everything is pinned in place, we're going to put it through our sewing machine on a zigzag stitch to make sure it holds its stretch. Then we're going to cut off the excess on the edge and turn it inside out to start pulling it over the tail. Much like putting on a pair of tights, we're going to slowly drag the fabric up, make sure we smooth it out, and that stitch is on the bottom of the tail. And this is how we're looking. We're getting really close to the end now, so we're going to do the tail tip. Draw and cut out a foam shape of the tip based on whatever character you're doing. And then we're once again going to pattern it onto our spandex. We're going to cut it out twice, so obviously we've got the two halves, and then once again we're going to pin that together and sew it on our sewing machine using a zigzag stitch. The most important part of this step is to make sure you leave a hole in the middle of the tail tip, because that's where you're going to insert the rest of the tail to sew it all together. Leaving this hole is also super important because it will allow you to insert your stuffing into the tail tip with ease. Make sure to put enough stuffing in there to fill all the corners. You don't want them sagging or like inverting on themselves, because it just looks better like this, right? Doesn't that look pretty? Once the padding's in the tip of the tail, we're going to take the rest of the tail and shove it into the hole, baby. Make sure to evenly distribute the stuffing once you've put it on there. I'm then going to trace down from where the middle of the scales are to where the tip of the tail is to make sure everything sits nice and evenly. To attach the tip of the tail, I'm simply going to take a red the same shade as my fabric and hand stitch it together. Don't worry about the ugly seam line at this point, because we're going to fix that in a minute. Just give us time to cook. Let them cook. To secure the fabric to the top of the tail, I'm just going to take my hot glue gun and dump a load of hot glue on there and start very carefully shoving the fabric into the hole. Be careful not to burn yourself on this bit, just take your time and take it easy. I'm going to take some extra hot glue and pour it into the hole, just for a bit of extra security. You're then going to pick up your elastic. This is how you're going to attach the tail to your belt. I'm going to take a little bit of hot glue and stick the elastic onto the top half of the tail. Once that's dry, I'm going to take the hot glue and do the same on the other side. And then I'm going to repeat this process for the bottom. This leaves us with a really nice little elastic hoop you can easily slip on and off your chosen belt. And now we're on to the final details. For shading, I mentioned I was going to be using an airbrush in this, but I thought I'd use my trusty old eyeshadow palette so I could show you how easy this method is. Taking an eyeshadow shade that is darker than whatever your chosen fabric is, you're going to take a nice little flat brush and just start shading wherever you think the natural shadows of the tail would fall. This is obviously most important on the scales we've made, because those are like the main 3D elements, but you can go in and do it wherever you like. This really starts to bring the tail to life and I think looks great. I also like to add a tiny bit of variation throughout the rest of the tail as well, just a little bit of speckling here and there. Now, to cover up the ugly hand-sewn join, I'm going to take a tiny little piece of scrap leather and super glue it to where the join is. This acts as like a little bracelet decoration thing, but mostly, yeah, it's just to cover that awful little join, and it looks really cute. This is how it's looking so far. As I was making this for my friend who was doing Karlak, I thought I'd add a fun little dragon charm to the end of it as well, just as a nice little detail. And we're going to attach that just using a simple little metal ring and some jewellery pliers. And that's us done! And that is how you make your own little devil tiefling imp tail. I made this in literally like 2 days on and off, all for under £20. Most of it I already had at home, and I think it's really effective. Here's the lovely Nika looking absolutely wonderful in their modern Karlak with the tail I made. And here you can see how it sits. The shapes are really nice, and I really hope you found this tutorial helpful.